and we'll welcome Asha and turn it over to her. And it's all yours, dear one.
Thank you,
Thank
thank you, thank you. I'm very, very glad to be here. It's always a great joy to be talking to all of you. Just a real pleasure for me. So, friends, today, I wasn't sure what I'd talk about, but just listening to the reading again and realizing for the last 3 weeks, or I should say for the first weeks of the year, Swamiji emphasizes these certain passages of the Bible, which are darkness was there. I mean, light was there, but darkness comprehended it not. Actually, having gone through these readings year after year now for since 1989 or so, 87 when he wrote them. Excuse me, it didn't actually come in that soon because the first set of readings he wrote were twice as long and they were very more difficult, but they were still the same concept. You sort of, after a while, it's just like this one just goes on and on and on. I mean, I've heard that darkness didn't comprehend the light. I sort of feel like saying, all right, already, sir, we've got it. We've got the point. Why do we have to keep emphasizing it? But uh, part of the pleasure of coming around again and again to the same ideas is that you have to go deeper and deeper into them. If you're in a position such as I am, where you have to think of something new to say, it's necessary to go deeper into them. We're not college professors, unfortunately. You can just go to the file and get, the first, second, and third sermon and just read it again. A lot of times I'm not even preaching to a parade. I'm preaching to just the same fixed audience. But the other side of it, of course, is that the nature of the spiritual path is that as long as we're limited, we only understand part of it. And ultimately, we'll come to infinity and we'll understand all of it. And Master put in that extra phrase on the definition of God, Satchidananda, and the extra phrase is ever new. And that's the fascinating part of any kind of ritual or repeating study or return to the same books. And those who are devoted to Jesus just open the New Testament over and over and over again. And I've certainly had experiences with the Bible where I understand how a person could do that because it's a living presence, as is the Bhagavad Gita. Master put whispers from eternity there with the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita as a not merely a static book, but a living thing. I started studying Swami's, what is now called the Art and Science of Raja Yoga. That time it was called 14 Steps to Higher Awareness. It was also called 14 Steps to Perfect Joy. And the copy that I had was when it was a correspondence course and it was mailed out. So it was 8.5 by 11 printed sheets, which you put into a binder. And it was decades before I went to buy the book because the thing was just the same. So I would reread the same copy for years and years. I had notes in it. I had yellow highlights and so on. And I know that gremlins would sneak into that book and add paragraphs, add whole new concepts, even whole pages that even despite the fact that they imitated my handwriting and put handwritten notes next to it, I was absolutely certain I'd never seen it before because the light always shines, but the darkness doesn't comprehend it. And we don't particularly like to think of ourselves as the dark. It pleases us to think of ourselves more that we're on the light side of things. And relatively speaking, I think we are. I think we're part of the solution of the dilemmas that the planet is facing. As Atman said in our movie about Ananda, when he was just talking about lots of things that we're doing, he said, if everyone in the world lived the way Ananda lives, we wouldn't have all these problems. It's really as simple as that. When I was talking to Swami once about higher ages, I made the suggestion to him that inasmuch as we seem to be tied to his coattails, that if he incarnated again, we'd undoubtedly have to come with him to help him again. So I made a request that he wait until a higher age because I've sort of had it with this early Dwapara stuff. It's just not my cup of tea. But his comment was twofold. And one of it was that even in the highest age, as he put it, it's still the material plane. He said, but this is the part I loved. He said, but people like us are in charge. And so I tried to think of a world in which people like us, and I don't just mean you and me and a couple of my other friends. That's not what I mean exactly, but people who understand self-realization as the goal of life, who are working on themselves, who are Kshatriya Brahmins instead of Shudra Vaishyas. He said, people like us are in charge. I said, so you mean the whole world is like Ananda? He said, yeah, the whole world is like Ananda. And that's what a higher age would be like, where you could trust each other and shake hands and mean it and tell the truth. I mean, you can go through all of that sort of thing. Well, anyway, in early Dwapara, we really are facing this light against darkness. Although what we're really seeing is darkness just scrambling for ascendancy right now. All the dark people are just fighting each other. I'm very I think there are shades of morality even in public life, but overall, it's a lot of self-interested people for the most part. I'm not going to be universally condemning, but the nature of the planet is self-interest, self-aggrandizement, and some of the worst examples of selfish leadership is really just the public expression of the values that many people hold. If I can get it for myself, why wouldn't I? Just like that. There was a terrible scandal here in the local area in one of the local high schools, one of the most competitive Silicon Valley high schools, which, you can just escalate that. I don't know what the Dallas equivalent or the rest of the equivalent is, but you can imagine what that is. I mean, the kids start preparing their resumes when they're 4 years old so they can get into big colleges, so they can go get big jobs, so they can get big money, so that they can be happy. I mean, so there you have it. That's the story. So there was a huge scandal because the children, who being very, very smart with technology, figured out how to hack into the high school records, which is pretty easy to do, and just change their grades so that their transcripts would look better. I mean, it was just too obvious a solution. Like, how could you not do it if you knew how to do it? They probably wandered around in the high school supposedly secure site probably all the time. So there were two things that made that shocking. One was that they did it, but the other was how little remorse they had for it. Because, and actually I give them credit here, they said, no one ever asked us if we were learning anything. All anybody wanted from us was grades so that we'd have the transcript so we could go to the next step. So we found a more efficient way to get the grades. It's like, so what's the problem? So what we're just seeing is just this all pervasive lack of light, just a complete misunderstanding, because values have become completely externalized and who we are as people has become greatly minimized. We admire the scoundrels who get away with it. That's the way it is. That's the darkness. So that's the world. And we like to think of ourselves as being the light side of things, which we really are. Master said that the difficulties that will descend on the world, and we haven't really fulfilled his prophecy yet, we're just sort of peeking inside that room right now. He said it's entirely to bring people to God. And it's very hard for us because we like to think of Divine Mother as being nice. So it's sort of hard to think of all of these difficulties actually being her gift to bring more people to God. So, we will grow. It's inherent in our nature that we will grow. So we kind of have two choices about how we grow. This is the way I always think about it. We either see something beautiful and rush to embrace it, or we cling desperately to where we're standing and our backside catches fire. And the result is, one way or another, we're going to move in another direction, because it's the nature of the soul to want to expand. It doesn't just want to sit there. It's really just as simple as that. It's not going to sit there. So what's happening in a very big sense is that a lot of fires are being lit behind people. And the question is, which way will they go? So Swamiji's continuous statement, the light was shining in the darkness, but the darkness comprehended it not. The problem is not with the light. The problem is with the darkness that won't comprehend it. So, putting us still in the category of light, every one of us knows that there's parts of ourselves where the darkness is still not comprehending the light. And I find it really interesting that Swami pairs this particular expression of this thought. You know, he was the light of the world and the world knew him not, as John says it. And then he goes to the Bhagavad Gita, whenever virtue declines and vice predominates, I, the infinite spirit, take visible form. Now, we think of that as this, and it is, this cosmic statement about how avatars continually come to this world. And they do. Master's here again. The teachings of Jesus have been lost and confused, so he's come back to teach us. The world has become divided by spiritual sectarianism, so he's taking the two the most illustrative examples and two of the most powerful and famous still existing avatars, which is Christ and Krishna. And he's saying, guess what? Far from being opposites, these are actually just the same. You know, and for those of us who are more in tune with a higher age, it's like, yeah, of course. But for much of the world, the light shines and the darkness comprehends it not. But if the light persists, gradually it just rises and gets brighter and brighter. But coming back to the Bhagavad Gita, where it talks about, I take visible form, I realize because true scripture can be interpreted on every level. Swamiji writes about how when Master was first interpreting the Gita, and he gave so many different explanations for each stanza. Swami writes in the New Path about how he thought, can't he make up his mind? That's how Swami puts it. Can't he just decide what it means and just stick with one? Because that's the Western way of thinking. We want to just get it all the way down. Aristotelian logic, they call it. If it is this, it can't be that. And Swami says that in India, the more interpretations you can get out of one verse, the more they actually would have friendly competitions to see how many different interpretations you could get out of one verse. And, you know, Adi Shankaracharya, you know, could get 100 interpretations out of one verse. And that was just considered to be such a great feat. But in the West, we're so linear. We just get very confused about that. I mean, not us, but the essential nature of the civilization. So the Bhagavad Gita verse, it's so obviously about the return of avatars. But I also realize it's also a very personal promise. Whenever virtue declines and vice predominates, and perhaps those are too strong words, but whenever the light becomes obscured by shadow, I, the infinite spirit, will take visible form. And we think of that as you know, the avatar clothed in a human body, but it only needs to be visible to the eyes of the devotee. And what that is about is the fact that Divine Mother is always with us. We are never alone. It's so profound. That's where we are when the light is shining and the darkness comprehends it not. It's when the devotee thinks that God is not with me right now and right in this moment. There, we did the astral ascension ceremony for Dikshini, who we all know who just passed, the mother of Biraj. Many of you know Biraj. His mother died yesterday too, as it happens. And also she was 97 years old. So it was a very timely passing. It was an appropriate and a timely passing. And then also the very elderly mother of a woman in our church. As it happens, 3 people have passed. The the mother of the congregation member, it was complicated, of course, by COVID, because when her mother was in the hospital, she couldn't be with her mother. This is the incredibly painful, one of the most painful side effects of this pandemic is that loved ones are separated at the hour of passing. And I've been I've been sufficiently involved with the passing of enough people now that I've so often seen, even when relatives are determined to be with the person and quote not let them die alone, you'll be with them 24 hours solid. You walk out for 5 minutes, and in that 5 minutes your person will die, because it's hard for them to leave when you're sitting there. It's not that it's bad that you're sitting there, but sometimes it's just easier to go when no one is in the room. And so it's not like, people torture themselves. Oh, if I hadn't gone out to make a phone call or get a cup of coffee. No, no, no. It's the goodbye was done. And now it was just easier to walk out when you weren't watching. But that's part of it. But the other part of it, I realized, and it's odd to me that I've never said this out loud before. The person doesn't die alone. As soon as they begin to leave this world, it becomes a really crowded room. Everybody you love who has gone before you, all your very, very close friends that never incarnated here but have been waiting for you in the astral world, the masters, the angels. One man who had a near-death experience and came back, he said when he crossed over to the astral world, this was his actual world. He said he was on the ground level of a huge stadium of people who are all cheering his arrival. No, it's just like I was remembering many of you know Rich Bazan, the wife of Hashi Bazan, the husband of Hashi Bazan, and he died of ALS. Now it was at least 10 years ago, maybe even longer. I think longer. And just before he died, or close to the time he was dying, he was a very colorful and lovely man. And ALS is a hard way to go. Lou Gehrig's, he just gradually lost his body without losing his life. But toward the end, he had a dream that he told his family about. And in the dream, he'd gone somewhere else, and there was this big room, and there was a huge party going on. It was just a great party. But he couldn't come into the room because he had the wrong costume on. So they wouldn't let him in the room. But this is how he explained it to his family. But that didn't stop me. I just partied on alone in the hallway, is what he said. And not too long after that, I think he got the right costume and he got into the party. But we are never alone. And sometimes when we slip out of this world, we suddenly realize. And we realize also that even while here, Master said, this is how Master put it. Swami wrote this in also about the astral world. Basically, angels are surrounding us all the time, trying to help us. We just can't see them. Because the light shines in the darkness, but we comprehended it not. But even if we can't see them, we could feel them. We could feel them if we wanted to. We have this idea somehow that God's presence, that Divine Mother's love, that Master's attention to us is a limited quantity. And people will say things like, I don't want to bother him, which is a very clever way of staying in the darkness. We act like we're being considerate, but it's not really considerate. Well, this is my tiny world, but I always tell people, go ahead, write to me, call. If you need to talk, let me know. Oh, they said, I know you're so busy. I said, yeah, but if nobody calls me, I'm not busy at all. So don't worry about it. It's like, this is what we're all here for. We're here to help each other. But imagine being on the level of the angelic beings or Master or Divine Mother herself. Here then is the fourth and last stage of the soul's long journey. They give everything to us. They live to serve. Master says, a trillion times, if necessary, I'll return to this world as long as one stray brother is left behind. I think about that a lot. And then he says, on bleeding feet over crags of suffering. I mean, it's very dramatic. Master says, I'll return for that one stray brother. And in my inner conversations with Master, sometimes I said, I'm kind of sorry about your bleeding feet, but well, that's the way it is, isn't it? If you're just going to have to come back and get me, you're just going to have to come back and get me. And that's all there is to it. And that's really how we have to be. If we find ourselves in darkness, the Gita, and darkness means just, I'm irritated, I'm having a bad day. I'm frightened, how is this going to work out? I'm heartbroken over some disappointment, or just, cosmically. I just can't bear the early Dwapara nature of this planet. It's just unbearable. There's just so much. And it could get a lot worse. How are we going to stay in the light in our own little Armageddons, and maybe a bigger one that shows here? Swami gave me advice on this point once very simply. He said, you have to practice when it's easier. You have to be practicing all the time. And there's a tendency, darkness persuades you that this isn't really that important. Don't bother the guru, or it's really, you can just indulge yourself in this particular way. You can just have this really angry inner dialogue about that awful person. It's okay. But it isn't. It never is. That doesn't mean we're not going to do it. Let's be realistic. But there's a difference between behaving badly and then justifying our bad behavior. My position has always been, this is who I am. Not always, but I've learned to come to it. I'm not proud of it, and I don't intend to continue, but this is who I am right now. I remember when a girl was having a bit of trouble with someone, one of the people who had responsibility in her community, and the man was very, 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 very difficult. There's just no way around it. He had the karma to have responsibility, but he was very, very difficult. And she finally wrote to Swami in frustration, just, I can't get along with him. He's just awful. She was very frank. He's just awful. And Swami writes back and says, well, just try to be his friend. And she wrote, sir, I don't even want to be in the same room with him. I certainly don't want to be his friend. And it was just like, okay. And as Swami said to me once, so much for theory, let's deal with reality. This is what we have. But there was no pretense on it. It was just, I'm just not that good. I'm just not that good, and I'm not capable of being that good. But that doesn't mean it's okay. It just means that God has to come in more visible form before we're going to be able to see it. But that verse of the Gita, don't think it's not personal. Sister Gyanamata put it so sweetly when she said, I know, Master, you came for this world-changing mission, and you were sent by Babaji and all of this. But then she said, but I like to think you came just for me. And Master himself puts it that way when he says, I'll come back just for one stray brother, again and again if necessary. It's very hard to believe that we're that important, but we are. Of course, we have to understand that in a non-egoic way. But understanding that in a non-egoic way, we actually are that important. Isn't that something? That's how Jean Vianney, the Curé d'Ars, said, if you knew how much God loves you, you would die for joy. Well, that's my comment. So, shall we have a conversation? Shall we ask questions? What would you like me to do next?
Well, we're opening up the floor now. You can put questions in the chat box and we will pass them on, or you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask the question. We've learned to do this. We sort of just take times, and then some people, like Eric, raises his hand. So, Eric, we'll turn it over to you.
I really like the practical aspects. Whenever anybody does a reading at Ananda, I always like it. And, when they're speaking, I always like to hear the practical aspects. And, there's so many practical aspects to feeling for the help around us. I always love listening to near-death stories. For some reason, I've read many, many of those books, and they always talk about the angels that are around a person all the time. And I've been practically feeling for, sometimes we have expectations and we have to watch out because we think we should be able to see them, we should be able to hear them. But when a person is silent enough, and I've been trying to get more and more silent inwardly to feel what it is to have those beings around me and listen. And it's not so much what I've heard from a woman named Carolyn Mace, who's a famous speaker. She says, it's just guidance you ask for. It's not like they come in and do it for you. We can always ask for the guidance and practically work with that. Does that make sense? And it's lovely to feel for those beings. I mean, there's one what is it, near-death experiencer that says she has a spirit team. It's kind of like they're assigned to you. They must get really bored if you never talk to them, right?
Well, it's when Swamiji says we're very busy in the astral world. When Paula was dying many years ago, many of you have heard about it. She had a glorious death, a very conscious passing. And when she was on her deathbed, she telephoned Swami. She was talking to him on the phone. I think he must have been out of the country. But anyway, she said to him, she had a very childlike way of saying, I hope they have a job for me in the astral world. I like to be busy. And Swami said, oh, I'm sure they're ready for you, Paula. And then after she passed, I said to Swamiji, I feel like Paul is just kind of walking around helping me all the time. I said, do you think she's conscious of us here? And Swamiji said, oh, yes, of course. Just like that. Oh, yes, of course. I mean, what you don't, when you die, you don't become somebody else. I recently was reading something that Master wrote, just a paragraph I'd never seen before. He said, people imagine that when you die, we all become angels. He said, if it were that easy, we'd all just go throw ourselves into the ocean. I love the way he put it. He said, you don't, when you die, you're just yourself in another costume. So all of the intense desire to be useful that so many of us feel, nothing happens to that. I mean, it's so fundamental to our nature. How could it go away? Plus, here then is the fourth and last stage, which is the desire to help others at whatever cost. That's how it is in the festival. From a life of infinite joy and freedom in God, willingly to embrace limitation, pain, and death for the salvation of others, such ever is the sacrifice of the great masters. Here then is the fourth and last stage of the soul's long journey, which is all of us have to become much more concerned about the welfare of others than of ourselves. So if that's a divine quality, it has to continue with the same intensity in the astral world. I believe everything I read about the astral world without ever being able to see it, but there's an intuitive knowing. I was just yesterday saying, it's so annoying because if I could remember it, it would just be so much nicer. But I remember it on a soul level, but not on a brain level, so to speak. But Swami writes about it, and he says, and I love this part of it. You walk around on the astral planet the same way you walk around on the Earth planet. It was such a specific statement. I had to think. I just like, oh my gosh, like I just your brain kind of goes on tilt. But the point being, we're just ourselves. So whatever's important to me now is going to be important to me there. It's just the rules of the game are a little different. The costume is different. But the consciousnness that we're living by is going to be the same consciousness. How could it not be? Just when you really stop and think about it. When once someone had a dream about me and they told me about it, and they told me the things I'd said to them. And it was marvelous because I'd been looking for an opening to speak to that person and say exactly what I did say when we were both asleep. So Swami happened to be around, or when he next came, I said, "Sir, what is that? You know, it's exactly what I was looking for, an opening. And what is that about?" Because I had no recollection of it. At first, he sort of said he didn't know the answer, but then, which is sometimes what he does, either he doesn't actually know or he doesn't want to tell you. I don't know which, but then he'll change his mind. So after a moment, he said, the superconscious never sleeps. He said, the superconscious doesn't get fatigued. It's not physical. The brain gets tired because the brain is physical. So the brain needs to sleep, but just because the brain is asleep doesn't mean the higher levels of your awareness are asleep. And you're just the same in your superconscious, more so than you are in your brain. So because it's not really asleep, it would be looking for openings. In other words, we're not aware of it, but we're just the same. Swami actually said something very interesting. He said this way back in like the 1970s. He said, increasingly, my ego is aware of what my superconscious knows. And I've really thought about that a lot. He said, it's not really that we don't know, it's that our ego doesn't know. But he said, increasingly, the veil between them was disappearing. Something to look forward to.
I have a question. I'm Mallory.
Okay,
Can you hear me?
perfectly.
Okay. So I'm thinking of buying this ad because my business is slow, and but there's parts of it that seem intrusive to me. It's like this company can, if I tell them a vet near me or a dog park, I'm a dog sitter, or I'm a pet sitter, or a dog park near me, or a pet store, they can find out who goes there and they can target those people with my ad. And so that part of it seems intrusive and not in alignment with my values. So I guess I'm getting the answer talking about it, but I've been going back and forth because I really want business and they promise I'm going to get calls. But that part of it just seems like Big Brother, using technology in a not a very good way. So do you have any feedback on that?
Yeah, I would not agree with you. First, there's several points to that. First is everything in this world is a compromise. It's very, very hard in this world to find absolute values because it's a dual universe. So almost everything that's positive, you can always also see a negative side to it. I love electricity. I love the internet. I love the fact that I'm sitting. I mean, I can see your bed behind you, and you can see my bed behind me. I mean, we're both just sitting in our bedrooms. People on national television are just sitting in their bedrooms. I mean, it's just wonderful. We're all just here together. And yet, are these waves really helpful to us? Are we taking more energy than we can use? I mean, you can argue everything until you're absolutely paralyzed.
Yeah.
So Master's comment to Swami, which has been a very valid one at Ananda, you have to be practical in your idealism. You can't be absolute in it, because if you're absolute in it, you lose more than you gain, because you become paralyzed, because nothing is absolutely good in this world except God behind it. So sometimes we don't want to overthink things. We just want to take things at where they are. I mean, Swami wore, for example, he wore leather shoes, he wore leather belts. He was not a vegan. You can't fight every single battle or else you just can't live. And then you're not being practical in your idealism. You do less good than you would be able to do if you just weighed the pluses and the minuses and go like this. So that's the macro view. On the micro view, I bet you're a very good dog sitter and a very good dog walker, and I bet you bring a lot of really positive energy to things. So you're not intruding on people to announce yourself to them. You're doing them a favor. And isn't it wonderful that people can find the very people whose dogs are waiting for you? And this technology allows them to do it. And it isn't as if armed guards are going to their house and kidnapping their dogs. That that would be really a bad thing. All that's happening is they're going to receive an ad. And with all due respect, yours is not the only ad they're going to get. So it's not like some really horrible, unimaginable thing has happened to them. It's that they're just going to get news that there's a dog sitter and you need to live and you have honorable, serviceful work. So I would focus instead of thinking that it's intruding, I would pray to Master to make sure that the people who see your ads are the ones whose dogs belong to you. And just remind Master that there's a lot of dogs out there that you're ready to love and take care of, and that their people need to know that those dogs belong to you. So I would just make a positive out of it instead of a negative, because you need the money. And this, you have to be practical in your idealism. You don't want to get kicked out of your house because you can't pay your rent, because you are afraid to put an ad on somebody's computer or in their mailbox. The balance of harms is much in favor of your doing it. So it doesn't, you see what that does is it doesn't change what you're thinking. That my, this is really quite remarkable, isn't it? That they can target it like this.
Yeah.
It's just the balance of harms is not that serious.
Uh-huh.
Now, yes, the same technology could be used in a horrible way. And sometimes it is, and it may move to that. But Master inspired a great deal of this technology. I mean, you have to think just about Steve Jobs, who completely changed the whole world, who was very tightly tied to Master. So the Masters are making all this happen. Now, how it's used depends on human consciousness, but the technology itself is, look at us, look how we're using this. What would we do without this technology? We would have all just been lost during this whole cycle of time. So it's a balance of harms. And yeah, it will be abused, but everything is.
Yeah.
Because it's early Dwapara, which is why we wanted to wait and come back a little later the next time, but maybe not.
I was thinking, Asha, my business slows during Christmas, and so I send out 4,000 emails to people I know, like 100 a day or something, over a 40-day period. And I always get one person who's mad at me, and then the other 3,999 share and I usually have business for the rest of the year. And I was thinking of Mallory. It's funny, we talk about the practical aspect of asking guidance from that which is invisible to us. But she just shared among us, and in a sense, we're like her angels. And I was thinking, I go to Plano and Briscoe and all the places near her, hundreds of people I see within a 2-week period. I could hand out her a card and she'd have all the business she wants, I have a feeling, in no time. But anybody else could help her in that way. And it's technology like we're using right now. It's kind of good.
Yeah, it's very good. No, and this is Dwapara Yuga. We signed on for this when Swami was in India, living. When Swami was still in the body, and was speaking in India, and he was over there at the beginning. And see what's been happening in India in the last 25 years, more than that, but India's been transforming from this quaint, sort of impoverished place into an engine for the modern age. And it's been extremely disconcerting for many people over there to see how radically all that has been shifting and so on. But Swami's words were, this is simply a necessary rite of passage. And his phrase was, India is much too important to remain just a backwater. He says India has to take its place in the modern world. And the growing pains are tricky. And the growing pains of technology are very tricky. And, there's just evil people. There's going to be evil people on this planet for a very long time. And we were in early Dwapara. Purushottama wrote in his book, he and Vyasa wrote together, war continues all the way through Treta Yuga. Now, I mean, think about that. That was a very disconcerting realization for me. I mean, not that I'm going to be here all the way through Treta Yuga, but if countries can still go to war, we're still living with barbarians. So it's this is the nature of it. And for some reason, it's a good idea to be here. The master said that in that little thing I was talking about how we don't really change. We don't become angels just by dying. He said, we might as well stay here because this world is the best place to work these things out. And I mean, I really thought about that. Whoa, this is the best place to work things out. For one thing, I'd say, hate to see the most horrible place to work things out if this is the best. But I mean, I don't know what that means. Horrible might be the most peaceful and unchallenging, actually. Horrible might be the most pleasant, but not the best for working these things out. So we have to be up against it. We have to be forced to make decisions. And we can't be longing for a world that isn't this one. It just is the way it is. So we have to, and being practical in our idealism, when we talk about Ananda, we always talk about people are more important than things. Where there's Dharma, there's victory. But actually, being practical in our idealism is as important as those other two. We actually have three. And I've shared this thought with a few others because lots of times we get up against a problem collectively or individually. And the actual answer is we have to be practical in our idealism. Swami was immensely practical. He did not go for extreme solutions. He just thought, well, this is the nature of the world. We have to work with it. We have to accept it and work with it and be dharmic within it. But we can't be too rigid. Even think about the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata was essentially the same place in terms of consciousness, except it was going down and this one is going up. And they were transitioning from Dwapara to Kali downward. We're transitioning from Kali to Dwapara upward. But there was the point at which, in the Mahabharata story, two things happened there. Arjuna made a solemn vow that if he did not kill a certain enemy, I think the man who'd killed his son, he did not kill that man by the time the sun set, then he would take his own life. Now, if Arjuna were not there to fight for the Pandavas, the whole outcome was going to be questionable because Arjuna represents the third chakra, which is willpower and commitment. And so if Arjuna gave up, then the whole thing would be over. But the enemy heard about this vow and totally protected the man that Arjuna was determined to kill. And Arjuna fought and fought and fought and fought and fought all day, and he just couldn't get there. And finally, the sun was going down, and then some clouds came over the horizon, and it looked like the sun was down. So everybody said, we did it. And Arjuna had made a vow, and you always kept your vow. There was no question about it. So the man that Arjuna had vowed to kill put down his weapons, and I believe he sat in meditation just being grateful. And then Krishna said to Arjuna, pick up your sword and cut off his head. And he went and cut off his head, and then Krishna, when he was unarmed and unable to defend himself, then the clouds moved and Krishna had held the sun in the sky. So the sun had not set because Krishna had held it in the sky. Arjuna said, Krishna, you cheated and you made me cheat. And Krishna says, Kali Yuga, you can't be as pure in Kali Yuga as you are in Dwapara because darkness is too strong. So and then he also made Yudhishthira lie. Yudhishthira had never told a lie in his life, but Drona was too powerful and they needed to undermine Drona. So they had to tell Drona that his son Ashwatthama had been killed. And Yudhishthira was the only one that Drona would believe because Yudhishthira never told a lie. So they killed an elephant named Ashwatthama. And then Yudhishthira said to Drona, Ashwatthama is dead. And then quietly said, the elephant. And up until that point, Yudhishthira's chariot was always 4 inches above the ground because Yudhishthira was so pure, his chariot never touched the ground. And when he said that, his chariot hit the ground. And that was that. And again, Krishna said, Kali Yuga, you have to cheat a little to defeat darkness. It's just too strong. Which is, you have to be practical in your idealism. It's not an age where we can be absolute. In very high ages, I think you can be, but not in this one. No.
Fantastic, wonderful. Oh my gosh, so much to think about. And yet, I would like to read a question, comment/question that comes up into the chat box.
Okay.
This is from Alex. If you want to make yourself seen, Alex, this would be a good time. It says, Alex says that he tuned into the Gita reading of today. The fact that it says, wise is he that sees inaction as action and action as inaction. And that when one is ceaselessly busy outwardly, he isn't attached to that action, but is ever free in himself. He goes on to say, that passage means while seated in meditation, doing nothing in the silence of deep meditation, you project a visualization onto the spiritual eye like the day you got married and elicit the same energetic flow if that experience was actually occurring, like the birth of a child or the death of a friend. The visualization elicits the chakras to flow, and that is action in inaction. While you're busy in the world, it's difficult to get the chakras to flow the energy. So this is inaction in acting. And then closing, it says, busy working in the world. The masters are busy in themselves, unattached to sense perceived stimuli, ever doing pranayama and free in themselves. God's blessings.
Is there a question there? Or is that a comment?
I'm gonna let Alex.
I rolled my eyes because action in action in action in. I mean, it's just like every time. I actually just Friday night, class number 46 of the Bhagavad Gita series I'm doing for Online with Ananda. We were right there. It'll show up on my YouTube channel in a few days. I'm not quite sure when they get posted, but I was right there, and I was chewing through action in action in inaction. Anyway, you got the story. Is there a question, or do you want me to just comment on it?
Just a comment on it.
Okay. You know, the problem is when we start wording out all those things, just wording them out, it gets very complicated. And when we start talking about the energy and the chakras and how it flows and what it does and whether it's this and whether it's that, all of that is true. It's not that it's not so. It's just that the word pictures that we have, by definition, are not the experience. And so we can only explain them to a certain point. I've been giving I just finished actually in my 9 a.m. classes, and I'm not just plugging my YouTube channel. This is not really what I'm doing, but I'm saying I talked about living intuitively for a couple of weeks. I've been on it on my morning broadcast. I picked it up because I needed something else to talk about. And by the way, I need something else to talk about if somebody has a good idea. And I've taught it lots of times before. And I had a little template that I always use, which is Swamiji's notes from a class of Swamiji's. I mean, the folder's so old, I have no idea when I first took it down. Class, I think, is from the 80s. And when I taught this class, I learned a completely new understanding of intuition that I'd never known before after all these years. That's why it's so much fun to be on this path. I mentioned that earlier. Things just suddenly look like they never looked before. And I had this intuition that intuition is not separate from everything else we're doing. And maybe that's an obvious statement. And I think in action, in action, in action, in inaction is not as separated from everything else we're doing as the words make it seem. And I did talk for several hours on this, so I can't say it all here, but here's the basic idea that I realized. It has a lot to do with what our fundamental guiding principles are and the degree to which we are constantly conforming and disciplining our energy toward those guiding principles. In other words, if we constantly live in an effort to be in the light and to escape from the darkness, because intuition is simply being guided from a higher level of reality than just egoic desires. I'm not even going to say a higher level of than the ego, but just egoic desires. When we allow ourselves to be motivated to make our decisions from fear and self-interest, we are not acting from intuition because we're acting from materialistic considerations, from an attitude of separateness. If we consistently and just try to act as much as we're able, we have to be practical in our idealism, as much as we are able to make all of our actions conform to our highest ideals, or at least be in the direction of our highest ideals, then we are being guided by superconsciousness, and that's what intuition is. So this whole description that they're trying to put into words about how a sage or a master looks like us but isn't anything like us, his consciousness is so different. They're drawing these impossible contrasts because they're trying to awaken us to how really different this is. Because I had so many years of experience with Swamiji, and because we had so many different adventures together in so many different contexts. I mean, I was one of hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people whose life his life touched, and I was only one of a very large crowd of people who had adventures with him. But I did have quite a few. And the main thing that I've been trying to learn all these years, and increasingly since he passed, is how much he was like us and not like us. How much he was in action, and how much he was in action, in inaction. I mean, it's almost precisely that verse, that he completely participated in the world. He was completely engaged in the reality that all of us live in. But he always lived by the highest ideals. And he just, it was, let me phrase it differently. It was so ordinary that I didn't even notice it. I didn't notice that the fundamental thing he was doing was always asking Master what to do. And
Can I ask you another question?
And then doing it. Okay.
In the autobiography, there's a chapter in the book called Kashi Reborn.
Yes.
As one of the people that knew Swami the best, do you think that you could ask Divine Mother to have you help find Swami if he was ever to be reborn?
No, I certainly don't. I suspect, because I think I'm on a fairly short leash with him, that actually, I take that back. I have no idea. I mean, in just looking at the life that I lived and how important he was to me and how I recognized him immediately, all of that, logic says that, I'm pretty much part of his cohort.
Mm-hmm.
If he decides to do something else, the likelihood is that I'll jump on the bandwagon and come with him, because golly shucks, I can't think of a more fun life than the one I just had. So I would just be really keen to do it again. And he's given me everything that I wanted to have in my life, because now I get to spend the rest of my life telling everybody what he said to me. I mean, so it's been a real seamless, good project here. And it's hard for me to think of a better deal. But if karma dictates otherwise, so be it. I don't, it's not, I was just listening to Swami's own voice, and he was talking about Norman Paulson, who was his fellow monk, and how Norman had all these visions all the time. Norman had a vision of himself with Master on the island of Mu, which was 80,000 years before Atlantis. And Swami just casually says, he says, I just never have visions. I never have visions of any kind. He said, oh no, once I saw a big green face. That's what he said. He said the only vision he ever had was of a big green face. And he just sort of shrugged. I've never even seen the big green face. So I think the chance of my being able to do that is pretty close to zero, unless he had a reason. If he had a reason, I'm sure I'll do it. I don't think Swami's coming back real soon. At first, he said he wasn't coming back at all, but toward the end, he said, quote, I know myself. He kind of said, I know, I said I wasn't going to come back, but he goes like this, I know myself. He said, I'm going to come back. I'm going to want to come back and help you all.
Thank you.
Asha Nayaswami.
Hi.
Hi, it's Mike. And I was wanting to mention that you've heard, I'm sure, about somewhere somebody said that he got maybe half of his knowledge from wisdom from book learning and half of his wisdom from intuitively. And I work as a scientist or as an engineer, and I think that it's like almost all of it is intuitive.
Are you saying that that was something that Swamiji said about himself? That
No, there was a story about some saint. Somebody asked, "Did you get most of your knowledge?" It might have been in the AY. Did you get most of your knowledge from where'd you get most of your knowledge? And it was profound that he said it was half from intuitive. That was considered profound. But I work in a knowledge, intellectual, theoretical realm, and I think it's almost all intuitive.
Oh, I would think so too. Well, think of it this way. See, part of it is vocabulary. Where do ideas come from? And Master said that ideas are universal, not individual. So therefore, all ideas come from our connectedness to the greater reality. So partly what you might be asking is what sparks ideas? Because reading the ideas of others, reading the works of others, often sparks ideas. But does it really come from the books that you read, or did it just put you in tune with a certain way of thinking that allows you to enter that universal realm where those ideas exist? Or it's also a demonstration of your commitment to expand your understanding, and the angels reward you for the work that you're doing. And it can eliminate a whole lot of possibilities because they've already been thought of, and it can put you ready for the next. So it depends on who you're reading, what your attitude is toward it. But I'll tell you a very small experience that I had that relates to this. On one of the very first early lecture tours I took, Shivani and I traveled together. Shivani lives in Assisi. She's a founding member of Ananda. Shivani always had a great interest in Master's healing techniques. I was never particularly interested in them. Plus, she specialized in them, so I didn't bother because we were both just finding our footing at that point. She and I started out together on a 6-week tour on the West Coast, and we alternated. And I did classes that I was comfortable with, and she did all these classes on spiritual healing because it was a big deal. 1 week into a 6-week tour, her husband Arjuna, maybe it was that, it seems like it was real early. Her husband Arjuna, who was a contractor, had this big contract with the spiritual group down in Santa Cruz, and somehow he ran into trouble on that job. And he just needed Shivani to come and help him. So she just bailed from the tour, drove down to help him. It was a higher dharma. So I'm stuck with all her classes. So I know a little bit about spiritual healing because I've gotten a little. She gave me her notes, which are completely incomprehensible to me. And I had to fake it. And I remember the first class I gave, and this is when I learned about the difference between knowledge and intuition, because as you see, I just sail out. Now, of course, this is 45 years later, so I'm pretty experienced. But even then, that's not true. I often had outlines at the very beginning. but I also was very extemporaneous. So I'm up there. I think we were in Longview, Washington. I can still see the room, this little room. And I start talking about healing. And there's a point at which I feel energy in the room wants to know more about something. And this all happens on a nonverbal level, non-articulated. And I just basically have to say, sorry, guys, I don't know anything more about this, So I'm just going to have to stick with my script because my intuition can't go there because I haven't done my homework. But whereas in subjects where I've done my homework and I feel they want to go somewhere, even if I'm not even sure what's there, I know there's enough behind me that I can go there and intuition will fill in. So it was very interesting that I saw how study and intuition really become partners. And when I talk to people about, what I do, it's like, well, this is of course decades later. I have done an enormous amount of study, and I constantly study, and I constantly read and talk and think about these teachings. So if I go into a class without preparing, it's because I've been preparing all this time. And I never turn my nose up at other people's ideas. I never protect the purity of my intuition. I'm always immensely interested. I have a Gemini mind anyway, but I'm immensely interested. And I get all that in, then it gives me something to draw on because I realized how lost I was when I didn't have the background. Does that help?
Yes. Thank you, Asha. Thank you very much. I do appreciate that. It just brings so much more to mind about confidence from knowing the intuition, the intuitive source is always there. We live in an age of information technology, as far as a topic of just that so much can be tapped into from the meditative lifestyle and intuition, and not just in terms of the technical things, but in terms of the people that we're trying to collaborate with. To me, that's the main thing I'm doing, is helping the people that I'm working with.
Exactly. I just thought of another example that happened very, very early. Swami wrote that book, Your Sun Sign is a Spiritual Guide, which is still a classic book in the field. He was not an astrologer, but he studied astrology, but he didn't try to become an expert in astrology, but he studied. He got books, he read, he had several astrologer friends that he would talk to. He put out intellectual energy to understand the subject. And I think it was exactly what I'm talking about. But then when he was writing, he was able to write from intuition and say things that he had never read. But he'd done enough background work. He didn't just presumptuously sit down and say, give me a book on astrology. He put out energy, and then he could say, give me a book on astrology, because he'd earned the right to say it.
Wow.
Beautiful. Very complimentary. That's what I'm learning. I hadn't really thought of that before. Thank you.
Very complimentary.
Thank you. And thank you, Mike, for sharing. We have so much going on here. I can just feel another workshop's trying to happen with you, Asha, but we'll talk about that later. Meanwhile, anybody who may have a question, we're going to let Mayatri go first. She's been patiently waiting. And then anyone else, because we will have to wrap this up before too much longer until we get a workshop scheduled.
Okay.
So, Mayatri.
Oh, Asha, it's just always such a joy to have you on so many different levels. Thank you. I was thinking from what Mike was saying too, and what you were saying is it's a form of attunement, right? When we're trying to pull on a certain subject, we're just attuning ourselves to that consciousness through books and through any methods, but trying to just really tune into that level and that inspiration. And but anyway, what I wanted to ask you, first of all, I think it's great you plug your 9 a.m., which is 11 o'clock our time, because that is just the most amazing series, and I hope that I will have time to go back and go see all the many that I did miss, because they've just, every time I tune in, I get so much out of it. You asked about ideas, and I'm not sure I have them, but I'll throw out a couple of thoughts. Because you talk a lot about, I think the course that Swami did on material success or something. And I don't know if there's something in that maybe you could pursue. It's just, that's sort of a very broad idea. But the other thing is, yesterday when there was that ministers gathering, online gathering, and Jyotish and Devi were talking, and they were saying how in each community we need to really not only just individually work on, grounding ourselves in the teachings and everything, but the core needs to go deeper too. And you talk about how Swami would say, practice while it's easy. It's still relatively easy. I feel like we've got this little window here so far, and a lot of grace during this time. And I'm just wondering your thoughts on, for us as a community, such as we are, different from your, colony, suggestions or ideas on how we as a core can magnetize our core more and take everybody deeper together for everybody's good. Does that?
I hear you.
Yeah.
I'm going to answer material success first, because I do have a statement on that. The material success course Swamiji wrote like in 2004, 2005, when he first went to India. It was inspired by what he saw there, which was the conflict between the need for material success and the commitment to the principles of Dharma. He knew they weren't contradictory, but the country was caught up in a great conflict. So he wrote 26 lessons. And I gave, there is a full course that I've given on that, and I highly recommend it. But it's like, I don't know, it's at least 50 classes. It's not video, it's audio, and it's on podcast somewhere. And if you go to Ananda Palo Alto book study, it's listed there. I loved teaching it, and I've been told, oddly enough, there was when I went to India, I found this study group of women professionals who were studying that class, and they just said it was wonderfully helpful. So it's too big a subject for what I'm doing in the mornings, but it's a life transforming course and worth studying. And like many things of Swamiji's, and this is why I've done book study classes for the last 25 years, I'm always doing one, because Swami's writing is very subtle. And it's just, I started my book study classes because I was reading Hindu Way of Awakening. I was struggling to understand it. I realized, I bet everybody's struggling to understand this. And so I started giving these classes. When I did the material success course, I knew it was good, but I had no idea how good it was until I really went through it. So I highly recommend it. It's entertaining. It's a huge, big study. I have all these women in India who testify that it's changed their professional life. So I'm just repeating that. So that's that. I'll put that to the side. I also laugh. You'll never catch up with me because, see, I'm talking all the time. I'm always going to be ahead of you. But I'm a little older than you, so maybe I'll stop talking before you stop listening. We'll see. It's going to be neck and neck here for a while. Although a psychic lately told me I'm going to live to be, and listen to this, 103. Yeah, I know. That's exuberant. That's what I said.
We're grateful.
You all look surprised, so I haven't told you. Okay, I'm not going to forget your other question, but I'm going to say this. It was super interesting to me. My people, have lived to their mid 80s. I've just been counting on my mid 80s. I share a house now with Keisha Babetz, and so I have an in-house astrologer to whom I can pose all my questions. So I just asked him casually, look at my horoscope. What are my exit points? So there was like an 83 and an 89. Not that he could see. He frankly says he's not good enough to tell when you're going to die, and he probably wouldn't say it anyway. He's not experienced enough. But he saw 2 possible exit points. So I've been they have really been in, that was really in my head. And I realized I was cutting bait left and right here, just figuring I'm, another decade, I'm out of here. And but I was doing it all the time. So I'm talking to this psychic healer who's just, talking to me about what supplements I should take. And I happen to mention that I've only got 10 more years in this body, so what do I care? She said, oh, no, actually, I think you have about 35. And I just went, oh my God. She said, but you won't live that long unless you're active and well. You're not just going to vegetate. Okay. But the thing about it, which was really impressive, I realized that I was shutting down left, right, and center. Just really saying, I don't have to deal with this. I don't have to deal with this. I'm not going to face this. I'm not going to face that. And my housemate, who's 26, I mean, on many occasions, I had said to him before I talked to the psychic, you poor sap, you're going to have to go all through this and I'm going to be bye-bye. And then all of a sudden I'm not, I'm going to be here. But whether or not I'm going to live that long, it was a tremendous help, just a tremendous help to suddenly reveal to me how cowardly I'd become about so many things, because I was just thinking I could get away with it. I mean, I've done that before in my life and I didn't realize I was doing it again. Even if Master said death doesn't really help anything, I think it would, just like the idea of changing the costume was attractive enough for me to start thinking about it instead of be here now, put your feet on the ground, face into it, make as much progress as you can. Why would I be trying to, duck for cover and just outlast it? But very profoundly, I was just trying to outlast it. So now I'm thinking I'm going to live for 30 more years. And that's a long time. But even if it's not true, it's a better attitude to have. Swami himself said, toward the end of his life, he actually said, because Master always said to him, death will be the final sacrifice. Swami contemplated over the years, over and over again, what that meant. And he finally began to realize that one explanation was he wasn't going to be allowed to die. And he also realized that he was, how did he put it exactly? He was just asserting his own will instead of really surrendering to Master. And he changed his attitude. That he was, if Master wanted him to, because his body was so non-functional. I mean, literally, Narayani and Shurja would practically have to carry him. And then as soon as they put him down somewhere, he was full of light and was just fine. But, he could do almost nothing with it himself. It was just so non-functional. He was just really ready to shed it. But he just realized that was just the one more attachment he had to give up. And if Master wants him to keep serving, he'll just keep serving. It was fine. Accepting death was not a problem. Postponing it, that was the problem. So anyway, that's worth thinking of. So you may catch up with me, or you may get to the astral world before me. We'll see which one happens. Now, coming back to your community and magnetizing yourselves, I've been doing the same work for a long time, and I've been in the same community for a long time and had a lot of responsibility for helping to make it grow and so on. Think about how to say this. I never thought about succeeding. I never thought about making it big. I never thought about anything. I thought about, except this. I wanted to make every interaction, every event, everything we did as inspiring as possible for me and everyone else who was there. Because when we were trying to draw people together and make something happen, it had to be, there was no way to compel people to want to be part of it. They had to want to be part of it. And what would make people want to be part of something? Because it was lots of fun. And fun, as Swami defined it when he said that the whole purpose of Ananda was to have fun, was to feel Divine Mother's presence and then to share that joy with others. And so I think it's all about having fun. And in just making everything that we do, and insofar as any individual has any influence over it, by your silent or your active participation, just make it as much fun as you can make it, and have fun doing it. Be joyous in doing it, and not overly worried, because and the whole effort, the whole place that we have here, if I had more than 6 or 7 people in a class, that was a lot of people. I mean, if I broke into double digits, it was a huge event. But we made everything as deep as we could make it. And so then people wanted to come back because it was enjoyable for them. And I was not, I mean, Master said that, he didn't count who was in the room, and I never count. I just try to be with them and have fun. And everything else will take care of itself, because we can't really make things for other people. You know what I mean? We can't really compel people to want something. They'll either want it or they won't. And I think we just need to be at ease with that, and be a good friend, be as sincere as we can be. Don't ever try to be more than you actually are. Don't ever go beyond your portfolio. My Purushotama put it, he said, just when we were on a lecture tour, and we were a lot, not me, but several others were newer at what we were doing. There were these group tours. This was 1979. So we were all actually pretty new at it. Yeah. And he said, there's no reason to be nervous, because you're just talking to people you like about something you know. That's how he put it. And I've always remembered that. You're just talking to people you like about something you know. You're sharing with people you like about something you love. And that has a lot of magnetism. And that's just sort of who we should be. And really, after that, it's in God's hands. Success or failure is not measured by the number of people in the room. It's measured by how sincerely you make the effort. So what we do, we only have a certain number of tricks in our little basket there. And especially in this crazy situation, everything's just a little strange. So we just have to get up in the morning and think what I can do now, which is why I keep talking, because I keep getting up in the morning and figure, well, here's one more day and one more thing I can do. That's what I would suggest. You can chant and meditate, and then for a change, you can meditate and then chant, and then, but we can't go much farther than that. Be friends. Ananda's about friendship. Yeah, just be friends, be divine friends, and that's the key to everything.
Thank you.
That's beautiful.
Hello, Asha. I just wanted to say hello and blessings. Thank you for being here. And in what you just mentioned, divine friendship and joy, I just wanted to say thank you, because let me see, how could I put this? There's so much that you touched on. I want to rejoice on the news of your extended stay on this planet, because I'll tell you why. A while back, I read Master's The Yoga of Jesus, and there was a really wonderful quote in there. For a man to know God, he must go through the repentance, and that's the turning the consciousness away from delusive matter into the kingdom of God within, as he wrote there. And it led me to think over many years that really there are two kinds of people on this planet: those who have turned away from delusive matter, a lot of us, most of us here, I'm sure, and a lot of other people in other sanghas, and those who think this planet's the reality, caught up in social media and everything that they see is the only reality. And so I love in one of your talks, you described this spot where we turned away from delusive matter, and becoming a paramukta is way far out there. So we're on the sea, and you call it the icky middle. And so I love it. I love that phrase. Here we are swimming in the icky middle, and on this raft, and yes, Master is the raft that leads us on the sea of delusion. But we, it's a blessing to have all this community and this joy. And this Guru is having fun with all these teachings. Even death becomes something to laugh about. And so, I just want to say, keep plugging your YouTube channel. I also came onto those. I finished the New Dispensation series and just loved it. I wasn't familiar with that booklet and can't wait to get it. And I started finishing the race. And you're my constant companion on the way home. I work as a teacher. I'm done it late in the day. And so I just put you on there and you're just talking away in my ear and taking me home. And so that's why I wanted to say I'm thrilled you're going to be around another 30 years and just keep sharing your teachings with us. And can't wait till the day that you can finally stop by in person so we can have you in our new center when we get it. But thank you, just such joy, and I'm thrilled that you're one of our teachers. God bless you.
It's my privilege for sure.
That reminds me, I wanted to ask you, Asha, have you been thinking, because Pranaba has been thinking about traveling again and is tentatively writing in dates, and we're not going to let you off the hook either. Are you thinking at all along those lines yet? I mean, it's okay if you're not, but I'm just wondering.
Hadn't crossed my mind.
Okay.
I'm very interested that he is. That's very encouraging. I'm not in our area. You have to be 75 to get the vaccination, and I'm 2 years shy of that so far. But with the new president, it's likely we'll all get them sooner. I was sort of ambivalent about the vaccination. Then I just thought, oh heavens, good God, just take the darn thing, because then you can just start moving around again. So as soon as it's clear that we can move, I'm under very strict quarantine here because we're running our temple as a TV studio basically. And there's a handful of us who are pretty strictly quarantined so that we can all work in there. And they're very strict about that. So I can't break the quarantine until I really can. But even Shanti is also saying just a few more months, Dr. Shanti. So if that's true, as soon as it's done, we're probably on the road.
Well, we're looking at after the summer. So just know, as soon as you're thinking of it, Texas will be high on your list. And if not, you just let us know when you're thinking about it, because then we'll make sure we get some kind of inside priority, high priority.
I owe it to you guys. Wasn't I supposed to come? Wasn't I scheduled to come?
Yeah, you were scheduled, and we now that we've sort of expanded our reach in Texas a little more, we Dallas owes it to also help bring you down to Austin and play. So this is a tour of Texas.
I have kind of this sentimental desire to be there again, but it's just like my first 15 years of life were in Texas, and quite frankly, I never looked back once I left. But I find this sort of desire to be there. So who knows? I'm happy to come. And this is the work Swami gave me, quote, travel as much as you can. That was in 2012. And I've followed it since then. So why not?
So we can set up a lecture tour.
Sure, I'll have fun. I love meeting. Yeah, we'll have fun. Yeah, let's have fun. It'll be just great. Let's do it.
Fun.
In the time.
Well, I want to tell you that you're I feel like I'm going to be compelled to change my thinking as well, because I happen to know we're the same age, and I'd already calculated my relatives who have passed, and yeah, I got about 10 more years. And it's like, what? I have to change that. And basically, it's the attitude. I heard you. Whether it's 1 year or 10 years, and we don't know, of course, or till 30 something years, I got to change the attitude now. Thank you once again. Asha has somehow got me to hear something.
Just humorously, I personally, I love being older. I love the experience. I love my housemate Keshava, who I just think of as a peer, but he's my grandson basically, and I was just we chat a lot about the path and everything. He's very interesting to talk to, and I said something, we were talking about something about the nature of the world. And I said, well, thank God we're not 25 anymore. And he sort of looked at me and said, well, technically I'm 26, but I think I still fit in that category. And all I could think of was, oh my, all of it's in front of you. And that was just before I found out that I was going to live through a lot of it. Or I might live through a lot of it. But really that attitude, that's a terrible attitude. To just, I'm not scolding you, I'm scolding me. It's a terrible attitude to think, oh goody, I don't have to deal with it. Like, what is that? If we have an aversion to something, we have karma there. That's what makes us reincarnate. So why would I want to come back as a child just to have to go through something that I could just face right now? The mind is, let's see, this would be a perfect ending point. The light was in the world, but the darkness comprehended it not. So that's where we are.
Hey, actually, I can't let it in before I say one thing. That is,
Okay.
Ram Dass passed away recently.
Really? Oh yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and he had practiced his whole life, all the different teachings. And when he initially died, he died twice. Or he was dying, and he was in the hospital, and he was looking up, and he thought, I should be thinking of God, but all I can think about are the ceiling tiles of this hospital. And he goes, obviously, there's a little bit more for me to do. So he'd have, God on his mind when he died. But you know what he did for the next bunch of years until he died? He said, I'm here to help seniors who often feel very unworthy in some sense once they quit their work and their kids are gone and everything. In a sense, I think all of us owe that to the world to do as much as we can, as long as we can, like Joseph Biden, or some of the other people that Bernie Sanders, they're active and inspiring people till the day they die. And so I'm hoping you live to be 103, so that'll make it easier for me to 103. All right.
And do please keep talking with us.
I'll
Keep
do
talking all the time.
I'll do it.